last year's E3 was cancelled due to unfortunate circumstances with respect to the Death Stranding. In its stead, each of the big boys kinda just did their own thing. Nintendo had this terrible mini direct. Sony showed off the PS5 a bit, and Microsoft showed off their extraterrestrial monolith of death, which they called the Xbox Series X. But this year, E3 is back on the table, so I guess it's time to talk about all my pipe dreams and conspiracy theories that will more than likely turn out to be wrong in the long run, so don't take this video too seriously. That is, unless you find it smart and insightful, in which case, take it as gospel and don't ever question me again. Sony doesn't do anything for E3 anymore, but let's pretend for a second that they do. I'm taking you to an alternate dimension, and here's what you can expect to see from Sony at E3. Now, last generation, Sony pretty much just ate Microsoft alive, and this can be chalked up to dumbass decisions on Microsoft's part, in addition to a strong first-party output from the PS4. Currently, though, Sony is now facing backlash for their lack of backwards compatibility for anything prior to the PS4. At the same time, the PlayStation Store is being shut down for older PlayStation systems. If you've been following me for a while, you can probably guess that legacy content is extremely important to me, so for these two things to happen made me very, very sad. I have a bad feeling that what we are seeing here is some kind of repeat of what happened with Microsoft at the beginning of last generation. For those of you who are too young to remember or just forgot, Microsoft got incredibly cocky after the success of the 360, so they decided to add this stupid shit to the Xbox One where it needed to be online all the time, and you had to register each game to your online account so that you couldn't share used games with your friends. Not to mention, you had to have the Kinect set up at all times, which errs on the side of Orwellian. And I know that term is a meme at this point, but I only use it because it's quite literally a part of his work. It could turn your TV into a two-way communication device that simultaneously brainwashes you while watching you with the cameras and feeding it back to Microsoft. Potentially. Of course, if you own a smartphone, you're pretty much screwed on the Orwell front anyway, but it didn't help that the CEO was a complete fuckwit about it. It was at this time that Sony pounced like an apex predator in the jungle and humiliated Microsoft with this cheeky how to share PS4 games with your friends commercial.
Thanks.
It was succinct and vicious, and in this one moment, the Xbox One was annihilated before it was even released. Even though Microsoft retracted their weird always online bullshit in the game registration and whatever, their reputation still hasn't fully recovered. But now we are seeing a similar thing with Sony. They are not offering a legal and convenient way to play legacy content. And one of their chief executives basically said, "Why would anyone play old games? The graphics are bad." Which, you know, if my mom said something like that, that would be fine. But this is Jim Ryan, okay? Jim Ryan is not my mom. Jim Ryan is part of a video game company that supposedly understands what video games are, because that's their speciality. It's not a one-to-one situation with the Xbox thing, but there's a similar feel of arrogance and a general sense that they are not on the same page with the audience anymore. I mean, they think they're too good for E3, so that should tell you something. More and more, I'm starting to miss Reggie. I know he was just another executive at the end of the day, but at least you got the sense that he actually knew what a video game was and that he kinda cared, you know, a little.
Nintendo is not an or company with games devoted just to this group or that group. We're an ass company.
As stupid as it sounds, I've seen a shocking number of people who are actually on board with this logic. People who think that it isn't a big deal if old games cease to be obtainable and playable because they're old, so who cares? I compare it to movies. 1.5 billion crime drama films and TV shows have come out since The Godfather, but none of them make The Godfather an obsolete film, right? That's just not how it works. And some people don't see games as art, at least not in the same way that films or literature is, but even purely at the level of gameplay, there are nuances that don't all necessarily become obsolete just because other games happen to have been released since and have better graphics. There's a reason there exist people who still play classic Doom and not Call of Duty 2K21. There are nuances to how Doom plays. There's a flow to it that makes it captivating. Instead of ducking behind cover and then hoping you don't get spawn raped, you're always on the move and you're always shooting and dodging projectiles. There's a flow to it that makes it unique. Speaking of old games being playable, there have been reports suggesting that Sony is remaking the original Last of Us for the PS5. Not a remaster like the one they already did for the PS4. No, a remake. It's a remake of a game that isn't even 10 fucking years old, which already has a remaster. Remastering and remaking games can be a Sisyphean endeavor, especially if it's mostly a graphical overhaul, because it won't be long before it becomes obsolete. There was a time that I thought games couldn't look better than GTA 4, and it wasn't long until that started looking like dog shit, so then GTA 5 came out and I was like, okay, there's no way graphics can get better than that. Then Red Dead 2 came out, then Cyberpunk, rinse and repeat. When you remaster a game with a heavy emphasis on graphical improvement, it will inevitably look like crap again in a matter of time. That's unfortunately the nature of the medium. Ocarina of Time 3D, Star Fox 64 3D, these games look like crap. Unless you're giving them a fundamental overhaul and fixing gameplay issues like Banjo losing all his notes when he dies, a remake or a remaster can only do so much in the long run. But the thing that pisses me off about the idea of remaking Last of Us is that the original game hasn't even aged that badly yet. Well, I mean, obviously it doesn't look as good as newer games, it doesn't have ray tracing and Nvidia hair physics or whatever, but I don't give a shit, it looks fine. I'm kinda concerned about this actually. For one thing, remakes are often not one-to-one with the original game, which is usually a good thing, except that the original Last of Us, as I said in my Last of Us 2 video, had such an airtight foundation that you have to be very careful with any changes you make. This is not the kind of story where you can just mess around with it willy-nilly, and that's not to say they will. It's entirely possible this will just be Last of Us but with the slightly deeper mechanics of the second game. I don't know, but at least the graphics will be good because that's all that matters. One thing that I really hope they don't do is retcon a bunch of stuff to make the second game make 5% more sense. Trampling over a story that was extremely strong on its own just to salvage another game that was very divisive would be a very bad idea, and it would make me very upset, so I hope they don't do something like that. As a side note, as I'm recording this, apparently there was a 4chan leak suggesting that a remastered Metal Gear collection was coming to PS5. That would be a cool thing because a lot of those games could honestly do with a fresh coat of paint, which is why it pains me to say that this is almost definitely fakey fake bullshit. Because it's an anonymous 4chan leak, so I don't even know why I brought it up. But another thing that concerns me is this new narrative that Sony is gonna start playing it very safe by having an increased focus on guaranteed blockbusters. Again, I don't know how accurate this is, and these are fairly vague and relative terms, but the implication seems to be that unless you're making Uncharted, Last of Us, or God of War, you might be in trouble long term. And don't get me wrong, those aren't exactly bad games, but they will be if they get reduced to cash cows. I don't know all the details. Again, there's clearly a degree of internal struggle, and this news is literally breaking as I'm making the video. Not to mention Sony does have some weirder titles like Oddworld and whatnot, but it is concerning because this information comes not very long after Sony downsized Japan's studio, which was instrumental in a number of PlayStation exclusives. At the same time, there is also a rumor that Kojima is making deals with Microsoft, which would be absolutely unprecedented. This guy has been a PlayStation fanboy for over 2 decades, so if he really is going to jump ship now, the conspiracy theorist in me is going, okay, something is wrong here. Technically, Kojima Productions is independent from Sony, but Kojima consciously chose to release Death Stranding as a PS4 timed exclusive because he'd been making games for PlayStation forever, and I think they extended him a branch at the time, if I remember correctly. If the rumors are true that he's making deals with Xbox, that is strange to say the least. Again, I have no idea how substantiated this is, but it comes at a very scary and uncertain time for Sony. Last Guardian and Death Stranding, whether you like them or not, were both games that deliberately tried to be different. These are not generic 101 formula shooters or hack and slash games. These are games that set themselves apart with weird, unique mechanics and aesthetics that don't pander to the lowest common denominator, and that's not always good for business, but it was one thing that separated PlayStation from Xbox last generation, and the big reason I lean towards them. Xbox was the Halo, Gears, and Forza machine, which, you know, maybe you like those games, but these are not breaking new grounds. This is Gun Shootman, and Drive Car Man. Fundamentally, these are more or less the same games y'all be playing since 2009, which brings us to Microsoft. We are now officially talking Xbox. Since I grilled Sony for backwards compatibility, we're gonna start there. From what I understand, Xbox Series X can actually play games from literally every single generation of Xbox. Not every single game is compatible, but a ton of them are. Microsoft is actually beating both Nintendo and Sony right now in terms of backwards compatibility and support for legacy content. Sure, you could probably hunt down an original Xbox and the games for it the same way you could do with the 360 or the N64 or PS1 or the Genesis, but for you to be able to play Xbox games from every generation on one system is something I would have died for with PlayStation or Nintendo. If somehow the Switch could let me play all the best games from their previous generations on one device, or the PS5 could let me play all those games, it would be a godsend. But as it stands, Xbox is currently the only platform to even come close to that. I feel like if Microsoft is smart, they're gonna flex the backwards compatibility very hard right now, the same way Sony flexed the ability to share your own property with your friends back in 2013. But let's talk some new shit, okay? Depending on how much of my wild speculation about Sony is true, that could open the door for Xbox to become the platform for weirdo risk-taking games. And considering PlayStation was on fire last generation with those kinds of games, it wouldn't be out of the question for their direct competitor to start looking into that and reassessing the road to the top. Phil Spencer even conceded that the Xbox One's first-party lineup was pretty shitty. 5 years ago, if you heard that one of the big boys shut down one of their studios, you knew it was Microsoft. You didn't even have to look it up. Remember Scalebound? No, because that game doesn't exist anymore. But now that Sony is the one shutting down their studios, Microsoft could have an opportunity to fix their reputation. In 2013, Xbox made a big mistake and Sony seized the opportunity. Right now, I feel like Xbox could do the same thing to PlayStation. If they can drive home the fact that they have backwards compatibility and they are now the console for unique games, they could maybe regain some ground against PlayStation this time. Unfortunately, I'm not confident this will be the case. I think realistically, Microsoft is going to get up there, talk about teraflops again, show off a car or something, and then show some more gameplay for their safe picks until it becomes time to talk about the new Perfect Dark. For those of you who missed the announcement at the Game Awards, a new Perfect Dark game is being made. That is insane, but it's not being developed by Rare. You see, Rare has been making a new IP called Everwild, which looks kinda different and weird, so that's a good sign. When I realized Microsoft owned Rare back in the day, I started leaning towards Xbox a little bit. That is until I realized most of the important creative talent that steered Rare through the golden age was gone from the studio. I figured out pretty quickly that Rare was not the same developer it was during those days. Their newer games aren't horrible, but when you consider that this is the same developer that made GoldenEye, the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, Banjo-Kazooie, and Conker's Bad Fur Day, you look at them now and you go, dude, what happened? I'd love to see Conker's Bad Fur Day 2 or Banjo-Tooie or a collab with Nintendo to finish Donkey Kong Racing, but realistically I think they're gonna stick with the new IPs that they actually want to make, and maybe that's for the best. On the one hand, these new IPs are unique and they're not following trends, they're doing their own thing, but at the same time, I don't want them to make Banjo if they don't want to make Banjo. The original games were the product of passion and inspiration, and if they don't have those things with respect to Banjo, then they aren't going to make a game worthy of the name. That's just how it works. You have to want to make a good game. That being said, if they can give Perfect Dark to another studio, perhaps they can do the same with Banjo, but who knows. Also, as I'm sure you're all aware, Microsoft now owns ZeniMax Media, which is the company that owns Bethesda, and id Software, which makes Doom. Microsoft now owns Doom. Kinda. Microsoft is almost definitely going to start flexing all their Bethesda IPs, although I'm still not clear on how that impacts exclusivity and whatnot, if at all. The truth is, I don't really know or care about what Bethesda is up to these days, so, you know, they'll probably do something and I'll just ignore it. Take-Two Interactive has revealed that they will be at E3. As much as I would love to see something about GTA 6 or Red Dead 1 on PC, realistically, I'm thinking it's going to be some demonstrations of GTA 5 on PS5 and Xbox Series X, and maybe some more GTA Online crap. Oh yeah, they're making GTA 5 for PS5 and Xbox Series X, which is supposedly more than a straight port. They're going to expand it and enhance it, whatever that means. You know, it almost sounds like they're making a remaster of a game that isn't even 10 years old yet. Again, Welcome to the new Skyrim. Rockstar is gonna keep re-releasing this game until the human race goes fucking extinct. You're gonna be playing GTA 5 on your grandpa's dialysis machine before they port Red Dead 1 to PC. That's another thing. I don't think it's that unreasonable for a AAA multi-plat blockbuster to be on PC, which is a platform which has always been around and is also modular, can run at 60 FPS, and will allow me to mod the shit out of it. From what I understand, Red Dead cannot be on PC because it's literally technologically infeasible. The original code for the game is apparently held together by cobwebs. It's an incomprehensible mess, and for this reason, putting it on a platform as modular as the PC would be pretty much impossible from what I understand. I don't know all the details, but I almost wonder if it'd be easier to rebuild it from the ground up for that purpose, but at that point you'd be making a remake, so... If we're lucky, they'll make another game that isn't related to GTA or Red Dead, like one of its more niche franchises. I'm not super familiar with their other stuff, but in the name of rooting for the underdog, I wouldn't mind seeing something on that front. Ubisoft is going to be there too. I would love to see 17 new remastered ports of Rayman 2, because God knows we don't have enough of those. Currently, Assassin's Creed is in a bit of a Paper Mario situation, where the things that set the older games apart and made them unique and groundbreaking experiences at the time were stripped away or heavily modified, presumably so they can take it into a more risk-free, broadly appealing direction. It's having a bit of an identity crisis, again, much like Paper Mario. I don't have a huge emotional investment in Assassin's Creed these days, but for the sake of the people I know who have been playing the game since the first one came out in 2007, you know who you are. I do hope they reel it back in and figure that shit out. But there's also a divide, because there are newer fans who like the newer games but are largely oblivious to what they're missing. In my eyes, this divide kind of overshadows the games themselves just because of how familiar it is as a Paper Mario fan. It really is hitting home for me, and I am definitely rooting for the old fans. Nintendo. There was a time I thought Nintendo could do no wrong. That was a long time ago. Take the last Direct for instance. When that Direct was announced, it had already been a year and a half since the previous one, so a lot of us had high expectations. Then when it dropped, it was like 7 JRPGs and some shovelware crap. Like, I don't get it, man. Am I old? Is that what it is? Am I the one who's out of touch now? Am I Cranky Kong in this situation? Am I Cranky Kong? Please answer. Write a comment even. I guess they did have Splatoon 3 and a remaster of Skyward Sword. What is it with the remasters and the re-releases and shit? It even got Nintendo. I mean, it'd be cool to see Groose in HD without using an emulator. Not that I would ever do that, because I'm a good boy. Best case scenario is that this Direct was intended more as a little thing to hold us over for E3, where they'll bring out some heavy hitters, and for some of us, it worked. I feel like I have to keep reiterating that I don't hate individual people for liking JRPGs. I just can't fuck with the games themselves. Otherwise, I guess that Mario Golf game looks pretty fun, but that's ancient history. Let's talk E3. There's no doubt in my mind that there will be at least one Smash reveal. I'm guessing it's going to be someone spectacularly popular yet surprising. It's no coincidence to me that they chose the Game Awards of all places to announce Sephiroth while putting more divisive picks like Byleth, Pyra, and Mithra in the smaller directs. That being said, I don't know who that would be. If you didn't watch my video on who I want to see, my dream pick would be Doomguy, but my backup dream picks would be Porky and Eggman. While Doomguy feels like an obvious pick to me because of his maintained relevance in the industry, I honestly think it's going to be someone like Lloyd from Tales of Symphonia, and that's not a joke. I genuinely believe that could literally happen. From what I understand, Symphonia is a very well-liked game, and there is a lot of precedent for JRPG characters, so, you know, good chances I'm thinking. Another likely pick I'm thinking is Crash Bandicoot. He's another highly requested character who remains relevant in the industry with new games coming out in the current decade. Also, he wasn't included in PlayStation All-Stars, which I always thought was weird. You'd think he'd be in a PlayStation game of all things, but nope. Keep in mind that there are basically no rules with respect to who gets into Smash, so I'm not in the business of deconfirming anyone. What I will say is that there's probably a huge pressure at this point for at least one of these characters to be someone mind-blowing, someone nobody can complain about, because after these 2 slots get filled, it's over. That's it. Until 2024, when they release Super Smash Bros. Age of Ultron for the Switch U, which probably won't even have Snake in it. If you think people are pissed about an anime RPG character from a game that sold fewer copies than Banjo-Kazooie now, ooh boy. If the next two characters are JRPG guys, we're gonna see videos of Switches being burned. As for me, I'm just not gonna buy the shit. Whenever a Nintendo event shows up, there will always be the huge expectation that they will talk about some of the things that we've been asking for years. Traditional Paper Mario games, Mario & Luigi, Mother 3 localization, Pikmin 4, acknowledgement that K. Rool and the Kremlings are a part of the Donkey Kong universe even though they keep pretending they don't exist because fucking penguins and shit, I don't know. Any legacy content after the Super Nintendo being playable on Switch, like N64 or GameCube games, these are things I see people clamoring for all the time, and they honestly seem like no-brainer decisions. But what I've learned about Nintendo is that their finger is often not on the pulse of the consumers, and I don't understand why or how. They operate in mysterious ways that don't really make sense to me, or as it seems a lot of you either. It often feels like Nintendo is dedicated to doing literally anything under the sun. They will do anything except the very specific no-brainer things that many people are asking them to do, which is funny because this is supposed to be a company that wants our money. And then even when they do listen to their consumers, they can't even translate that correctly into action. Mario Galaxy 2 on that collection should have been a given. I mean, how else are you supposed to play it? And they made it a limited release? Like, is this company fucking broken? When people criticize Nintendo, there will always be the counter arguments of, oh, you're just being ungrateful, or oh, you're not a real Nintendo fan, which is honestly kinda disturbing, and I don't know why this seems to disproportionately occur in the Nintendo community. I know that it's hard to make video games. I took comp-sci for an entire year, so I know how bullshit coding can be on its own. But you must understand that Nintendo is two beasts coexisting. On the one hand, there's the artist side where they make the games that may or may not be amazing, but on the other hand, there's the corporate beast whose unmatched dominance depends entirely on your unquestioning obedience. Neither of these beasts can exist without the other. Without the corporate beasts, the artists do not have the capital to invest into crafting the games and making them good, and without the artists, the corpos have nothing to actually sell to make it a cash money. Because of this dynamic, this idea that you have to be grateful and supportive of every single decision and or product Nintendo does is deeply unhealthy in the long run. It's unhealthy for you as a person, and it's unhealthy for the industry at large. Because if you throw yourself at literally every single thing they put out without question, they're eventually going to start stagnating. The corporate beast is going to go, well, okay, those suckers will buy anything we put out, so why would we waste our time and money making the games good? If you're one of the people perpetuating the be grateful narrative, I'm asking you from the bottom of my heart to please reconsider what you're actually saying. And if you want to say that I'm not a real Nintendo fan, yeah, you're right. I'm not. I am a fan of good video games, and Nintendo happens to be the corporate middleman standing between me and some of those games. But if there is one thing I am thankful for, it's that they still haven't taken down the Mother 3 fan translation, and that Kaze Z Amanwar has not been abducted and locked in Miyamoto's basement. Yet. That being said, when Nintendo does do something right, they fucking knock it out of the park, which brings us to upcoming games. You know, at least the ones that have been confirmed to be in development. During the Direct, Eiji Aonuma did a Logan Paul YouTube apology video explaining that they didn't have any Breath of the Wild 2 news, but he assured us that development was going smoothly. So I'm thinking they might be able to show us another minute-long cutscene at E3 and possibly a more narrow release window. That's what I'm hoping for. Metroid Prime 4 is assembling a fucking A-team of game development personnel. They got someone who worked on God of War, someone who worked on Doom and Call of Duty. They even poached an artist from DreamWorks. At this rate, this is gonna be like the Suicide Squad of video game development. From what I understand, the game restarted development, so I'm not particularly optimistic that we'll see anything related to Metroid Prime 4 at E3. From what I understand, the development was restarted under Retro Studios because the previous studio was not making it good enough, so in a way, this is both a good and a bad sign. It's good because it seems that they are very committed to ensuring that the game is actually good when it comes out, but it's also bad because swapping studios usually just indicates trouble. Like Duke Nukem Forever changed studios like 18 times and look how that turned out. In any case, I kinda doubt we'll see anything. There is still a pandemic, of course, so all game developers are at a disadvantage anyway. I think the most we can hope for is for them to at least mention the game and talk about the new direction or something, like new ideas maybe they have, or some offhanded comment to confirm that the game definitely still exists and is in development. Now, I'd love to hear something about Pikmin 4, but to be frank, I'm not confident that this is even a game that exists anymore. Miyamoto supposedly said that it was very close to completion 6 fucking years ago, and then later clarified that the game isn't exactly a top priority right now, which tells me that they need to sort out their priorities. You always make time for Pikmin. Now how about Kirby? I'm always down for Kirby. When it comes to Nintendo's beloved series, they have a habit of either changing them up way too much and trampling over the things that made them good, or just forgetting about them and never touching them again. But through thick and thin, Kirby has always been there. Kirby is a series with plenty of games that come out regularly enough, and it's very rare that they fuck around with it too much. You buy a Kirby game and no matter which game it is, you're gonna see beautiful, colorful, detailed graphics, fantastic Grammy Award winning Kirby music, and gameplay that, while largely pretty easy, is just so satisfying. Sure, some of them have additional gimmicks and whatnot, but with few exceptions, Kirby is always Kirby. I know I grilled Xbox earlier for making the same Halo, Gears, and Forza every other week, but I guess I should pay some due respect. I'm glad there is some consistency there, and if I was a fan of those games, I'd probably find some degree of comfort in knowing that when I buy one of those games, I have a pretty good idea of what I'm getting. With Kirby, there are just no low points. It's just, wow, this looks cool, and then you do it, and it turns out that, yeah, that was cool. I find it unlikely that we'll see another Kirby game soon, but if we did, that would be pretty sweet. Something I have been hearing about is a new Nintendo Switch model, a Switch Pro, if you will. It's an upgraded Switch with much higher specs, capable of 4K output and an improved battery life. As far as I know, Nintendo has not confirmed this officially, but the precedent for such a move does exist, both with respect to Nintendo and the industry at large. Nintendo released an updated 3DS which had better specs and built-in secondary circle pad, and both Sony and Microsoft introduced intermediary consoles between the last and current generations, so it's not impossible. I'm hoping that if a Switch Pro does exist, that they don't start making games exclusively for it so that you can't play them on the original model and have to buy an entirely new $400 machine. I would hope that they just go the route of PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, where it runs the same games but with a performance and a visuals mode. On the other hand, the implications of such a move from Nintendo, which is a developer that generally doesn't like to talk about teraflops and gigabits per second, favoring a more gameplay-centric discussion, are kind of curious. In a hypothetical scenario where this thing does exist, perhaps it's a way of maintaining the Switch as a legitimate option. The PS5 and Xbox Series X are absolutely crazy in terms of computational grunt. I'm actually considering building a new PC just so I can be on par with the current gen. If only I had money. The Switch in comparison is a few notches above the PS3 and Xbox 360 era of consoles, which came out almost 15 years ago, although it is effectively using mobile hardware because of its hybrid nature, so that's worth factoring into the equation. And if you look at Nintendo's first-party software at least, you're seeing their trademark focus on aesthetic more so than insane graphical effects. Keeping this in mind, I am curious what Nintendo's angle would be in terms of having a 4K upgrade at this time. Ever since the Wii, Nintendo has clearly put power as a low priority, separating themselves from the competition. Their brand is carried almost entirely by their software, but of course software is almost always limited in some respects by how powerful the hardware is. Nintendo could probably make a AAA prestige Zelda game with Last of Us 2 level visuals if they really truly wanted to, but if the Switch can't run it, there's no point, and since Nintendo is extremely strict about keeping their own games on their own platforms, the technical bottleneck is always there, but again, Nintendo is less about power and more about fun. Except when they're not and they publish a turn-based RPG with consumable attacks and no experience points. At the end of the day, there's a good chance that E3 will have at least one or two things that I'm interested in, as usual. Maybe they'll surprise us with something we didn't even know we wanted. This video has been largely pessimistic, but over the last few years, my mind has been slowly pried open to things that I thought I would never enjoy, which turned out to be pretty neat at the end of the day. It will always frustrate me when the things I want to see just don't happen, but as they say, that's how the fucker crumbles. That being said, I really hope we get to see a guy crashing through a fake stage prop again, because that's really what E3 is all about.